it's not gonna be okay on its own. The question is, why is this phrase that everything is gonna be okay even present? One could say that it is kind of an attempt to counter an otherwise too negative model of the future with something that is too positive in order to arrive at an average, more realistic thing. So if one has a particularly negative model of the future, maybe also has a less dopaminergic state, then basically providing the lacking positive part might result in an averaging, now more close to reality, or more close to what would be optimal for basically future acting model of the future. Now, everything is not gonna, or it's not gonna be okay on its own, is something that I now, is a phrase, a sentence that I would now like to discuss, because in the last couple of weeks, months, and years, it turned out to be something that I always have to again remind myself of, because, well, nothing is gonna be okay on its own. It seems to be the case that there are forces, simplified, that are basically washing away work or invested time. If I happen to wear a particular jeans, then over time the jeans wears out. The same is true for my shoes, the same is true for my hair, which eventually does not wear out over time, but to a certain extent it also does, because it already is dead cell, it seems. Then I eventually have to cut it. I eventually have to cut my beard, I eventually have to cut my fingernails, I have to go to the grocery store and buy groceries again. These are just very basic examples, but there is also this thing where as you go through time, your body degrades, with basically aging, one could say. Or maybe also with entropy, one could say. Or maybe also with the attempt of preserving the current, and maybe even optimizing the current allocation of resources, one could say, the current allocation of matter, that is in my case a human body, as one goes through time and works against the forces like UV radiation potentially damaging the DNA and then eventually turning the body into something that is more and more cancerous, or other forces of that kind. One could also say entropy is basically the force that we have to work against, and it's maybe also causing the aging part, because, well, a rock, let's just say a rock that is very stable, does not so much age over time as a human does, but maybe because the human is actually the more complicated resource allocation of atoms, of quarks, and so on and so forth. But it's not gonna be okay on its own. It's also, now in this, it sounds so much like a YouTube video I actually did not want to watch. Like a YouTube video where somebody now tells you that it's not gonna be okay on its own, and it's all about you taking responsibility and having to work. But it's not about you, it's about me. I have to take responsibility. And this is a message kind of to my future self, at least that's the proxy I'm using for these videos. And I now wanna lay down why this is the case. I mean, I already mentioned a couple of examples. I mean, if I don't do anything, and this is not only the representation of thinking every now and then about this, but it is also the representation of this urgency, this sense of urgency, that I can never rest. I can never rest, I can never for 10 minutes, for 20 minutes, for a day. Of course I often do, but the question is, can I allow myself to do this? And as long as there are problems that I need to solve, and of course there are always seemingly problems that I need to solve, because there also seems to be this effect that the more you learn, I don't want to say that I have learned now more things, but if I have solved a problem, then I also probably have learned something along solving this problem. So I now know a little bit more, marginally more maybe, then I also see maybe that this is a problem, and then I also see that this is a problem, and this is a problem that needs to be addressed. So kind of the scope of responsibility changes the more capable one becomes, at least in solving one's own problems. And so the rate of problem occurring in one's life is basically to some extent dependent, or also increasing, scaling up with the potency of one's own capability, one could say. And so it's not gonna be okay on its own. It's also this, if I don't take up the responsibility of trying to solve this problem now, I also am I'm foregoing the possibility of becoming the version of myself that then would have this problem at this point in time already solved, and therefore I could, at the next day, for example, not have to, I could already solve the next problem, and this puts me on a positive trajectory, and all the other versions that were basically, it makes it so clear, if I have solved a problem, which I only have to solve once, ideally at least, but of course there are also problems that are recurring, like grocery shopping. One could also call some of these problems tasks, for example. Then every version of me that doesn't solve this problem at this point in time, and every version of me that does something that is not the ideal thing I could do at this point in time, but maybe the second best thing I could do at this point in time, or the third best thing I could do at this point in time. Every time I make a decision like this, or I don't make the decision because I'm procrastinating on it, I'm basically not evolving into this version of myself that already could have solved this problem, already learned something along this, and therefore already be now on the other. So if there is a decision joint juncture matrix, then there is a certain point, and this point now has two outcomes, which is that I already solved this problem, and instead of now cooking for 20 minutes, I drink a protein shake, and this also then maybe satiates me enough. Maybe it doesn't, and therefore the other thing would be the more optimal thing. But let's just say there are things that are avoidable in terms of time investment, and every time I invest my time into something that is not optimal, then I forgo the possibility of becoming the version of myself that already had this solved problem now, and basically I am now the worst version of myself. And the more I do this, the worse I become, and the more if I see that there's a problem, then I usually need to act on this, because otherwise the problem will persist and will occur again and again and again until I have solved it, and the versions of myself that are basically, I will evolve into a less and less good version of myself. And one additional thought maybe would be the following, or the frightening idea of what if I could meet, or I would have to meet at some point in time, the version of myself that could have been,